Abigail Williams and Benjamin Hutchinson are walking along about 11 o'clock in the morning on April 21st, 1692. And Abigail says, "Hey, George Burroughs' specter is standing over there." So Benji goes, "Where?" And Abby's like, "He's over there where the cartwheel goes along." And Ben, he has with him a potent weapon. It's a 3-grained iron fork, basically a pitchfork, I presume, and he chucks it in the direction of Burroughs. Now, Abigail falls into a fit, which she's prone to do. And when she comes to, she says that, "Oh, I heard a tear in one side of Burroughs's coat when you hit him with that fork." So Abigail and Ben go along. They go into Ingersoll's. They go into the great room. And about noon, Abigail says again, "Oh, I see Burroughs over there." So Benjamin Hutchinson draws his rapier and starts stabbing where Burroughs is gone. But Abigail says that he's gone. And then she sees a spectral cat. So Ben says, "I'm going to take this out with my rapier." He strikes the cat. Abigail falls into another fit. She comes around eventually and says, "You killed her." And immediately Sarah Good came and carried her away. So apparently, specters coming to you in the shape of a person, even though they're ethereal specters, people can get killed that way. One of the weird rules of specterdom, that it's like dying in a dream. If your specter dies while they're out roaming, then I guess the person actually, the witch, dies too. But the story doesn't end here. Around 4 p.m., after that Thursday's lecture is over, they're back in Ingersoll's great room. And this time Mary Walcott is also there. So Abby and Mary see Goody Hobbs's specter, who bites Mary Walcott's foot. So why? She's like, "Ankle biter, you got nothing on me. I'm a foot biter." So she bites the foot. Abigail and Mary have fits. And then they say, "Oh, now Deliverance Hobbs and William Hobbs are standing on the tables." Ben stabs Deliverance Hobbs on the side, and Mary and Abigail Williams say that he did this. That's how he knows, because he can't see what he's stabbing at this whole time. He's just swinging his rapier wherever they're pointing and hoping he hits something. So then Abigail and Mary say, "Oh, now the whole room is full of these specters." So Benjamin Hutchinson and another man, Eli Putnam, both grab their rapiers and just start swinging away. And Mary and Abigail declare that, "Oh, you've killed a great black woman of Stonington and an Indian that comes with her." So whoever those people were, they're apparently dead. The floor is covered in spectral blood, according to Abigail and Mary. Now the girls go and they look outside and they say, "Hey, the witches aren't here anymore. There's a great company of them up on the hill over there, and 3 of them are dead." And so that's one of the wild encounters Ben had with the specter versions of the supposed witches. This is The Thing About Salem, and I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack. Our ancestors were alleged specters.
They really were. They were supposed to be wrestling with people and doing all kinds of specter stuff with them.
Today we're going to talk about spectral evidence. Evidence the Salem magistrates were considering in judgment against alleged witches.
Yeah, anybody could say, "Hey, I saw so-and-so's shape come and pinch me in the night." And that was evidence. If another person said, "Hey, I saw that same person's shape come and punch me in the face while I was sleeping," those 2 separate events add up to one evidence in the Salem logic. Now, what spectral evidence is, we've talked about. It's basically people having visions, dreams, sightings of a person's specter, which is their spirit or apparition, comes from the body and goes roaming around freely, sort of like astral projection or something like out of body experience would work.
All of a sudden, I'm really thinking about the whole phenomenon of imaginary friends in modern times.
Yes. I mean, imagine these were a lot of the afflicted people who were seeing these things were young children or teens. And who knows, there weren't a lot of people around. They might have, had some of these imaginary friends.
Yeah. These specters were intruding, they were attacking. Sometimes they would offer the devil's book to an innocent, and it was just straight out harassment that was happening spectrally. Allegedly.
Allegedly. That's the important word here, allegedly. And allegedly, another thing that would be sometimes seen in these spectral visions were the witch's Sabbath, which we covered last week. So you can go back and listen to that episode for more on those sorts of visions. And specters, though they were ethereal forms, not physically substantive, and could just float around anywhere they wanted to any old time, they could still influence the physical realm. Just like that green specter is floating around, it's influencing that microphone right now. And so they could come to you and pinch you, and you would feel being pinched. They could come and bring you a book, and you could actually sign it, and they would take it back into specter form and vanish. So it was a very fluid kind of little bit of both worlds kind of thing going on.
The accusations against witches in the Salem witch trials was about diabolical magic, and this was diabolical. It was magical ability given by the devil. Allegedly.
Allegedly. Now, allegedly brings us to the problems with spectral evidence. The spectral events, of course, were only visible to the victims of the witchcraft and not to anyone else. So the afflicted girls, we hear a lot about them, were considered visionaries, and they could see into the invisible world, which was like a parallel universe to the visible physical world. So they're running along in parallel, and these girls can see both at the same time, where other people can't see it. So basically, there's nobody to prove that it happened. It's just one person's word that, hey, I saw this, and whatever they describe is the evidence.
They attempted to use spectral evidence prior to Salem and other witch trials in New England. In Connecticut.
Spectral evidence was being used until 1669. Then there was a case of a Catherine Harrison who was accused of witchcraft and tried in Hartford. On October 12th, 1669, the jury convicted her of witchcraft. But 8 days later, the magistrates came out and said, hey, we don't believe that this is accurate. We have a lot of questions still about the kinds of evidence that we're using. So they sent out an inquiry to a group of ministers led by a man named Gershom Bulkley, who was a friend of the governor, John Winthrop Jr., and a fellow alchemist. So they were kind of cozy, but Gershom, he seemed to have an ability to think outside the box, thinking about spectral evidence in ways that the conventional thinking wasn't looking at it. So they asked basically two questions about spectral evidence. First, was the two witness rule required for all evidences? So did two people have to see the same event at the same time? Or could you have two people see two different events that were like each other and say that that added up to one evidence? Then the other big question they asked was, is spectral evidence valid at all? They determined that multiple witnesses had to attest to the same event rather than individuals testifying to multiple similar but unique events. And they determined that God doesn't allow the devil to take on the shape of innocent persons in front of multiple witnesses, because that would open everybody up to accusation, basically. So if you could just get two people together to say that, oh, we saw this specter, it's so and so, that's going to be used as evidence against that person, but the devil could be impersonating them.
This conversation about spectral evidence happened decades before the Salem witch trials, but interestingly, Waitstill Winthrop, the son of the governor, went on to be one of the judges on the Salem witch trials court of Warrior and Terminer.
Now, the court in June 1692, they asked the group of Boston area ministers to weigh in on some important questions, such as, can we use spectral evidence? What do we do with it? And so on June 15th, the ministers returned the report. It's just called The Return of Several Ministers. It was written by Cotton Mather, but on behalf of this whole group. And they say in there that the devil could take on the shape of an innocent, even virtuous person. So you can't esteem that what is happening to the afflicted based on what they're saying that they see. You can't assume that what they're saying they're seeing basically is actually happening. But so they kind of come out right away saying, we're against spectral evidence, but then they close the return with the following message, that we cannot but humbly recommend unto the government the speedy and vigorous prosecution of such as have rendered themselves obnoxious. So they're like, whatever we say about spectral evidence, go out there and get these people. They're doing bad stuff. Get them. These spectral stories come up a lot, so stay tuned to future episodes of The Thing About Salem, and also tune into The Thing About Witch Hunts, and you'll get these kinds of stories. You have different forms of these spectral stories. You have the kind where it's basically the actual nightmare, that the term nightmare actually means a creature walking on your chest as you sleep. That's the nightmare. It doesn't have anything to do with horses. It's a different word, mare. But it's also related to a thing called being hag-ridden, which is a vision of a witch sitting on your chest, pressing it so you can't breathe. And there were a number of these in the Salem witch trials.
Spoiler alert, by 1693, the court was no longer allowing spectral evidence.
Yeah, when the Superior Court of Judicature came into session in the beginning of January, the first thing they did was say, no more spectral evidence. And it's a good thing that they did, because the court in 1692 had convicted 27 people. All 27 people that were tried in 1692 were convicted, and it was largely, even though Cotton Mather would say otherwise, it was largely based on spectral evidence. There wasn't a lot of real evidence involved. So the trials wrapped up in 1693. 0 actual witches were ever found using the spectral evidence or any other form of evidence. There were no real witches, and the spectral episodes were totally not real.
It's not real. Come talk with us and other fans about spectral evidence and these stories on our Patreon community chat board for the Thing About Salem podcast.
Yeah, and be sure to come back next week for another charming tale from the Salem witch trials.